One of the people in the state of California who has made himself a thought leader, a leader in the way that the state can go about its business, coming from San Jose, coming from that area known as Silicon Valley, is Carl Guardino. Carl, you may know, is a long-distance runner, a bicyclist, a swimmer. If you're around the hills down in the Santa Clara County area, you may have seen him speeding by, and I think his wife keeps up with him in these athletic endeavors. And so he's known for that. He's also known for being the president and CEO of Silicon Valley Leadership Group, which is a public policy trade association representing 400 of Silicon Valley's most respected companies. But to me, as a transportation wonk, I know him as a commissioner in the California Transportation Commission. And he has a long record of service both under Governor Schwarzenegger and now under Governor Brown, as you're now on your third four-year term, is that correct? And we in the transportation business, and the Sonoma County Transportation Authority and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, we know from whom blessings flow, the California Transportation Commission. So I had a boss who always said that he was an expert at sucking up to the speakers he was introducing, particularly if they were his immediate supervisors, and he was a master at that art. I'm not quite so good, Carl, but we are delighted to have you here. Thank you for making the drive up this evening to Yosemite, and we look forward to hearing you talk about sustainable cities, sustainable leadership.
Jake, thank you so much. I'm honored to come back. You may recall, or not, that Judy Corbett very graciously had me come speak 6-7 years ago, which means that you don't have a very long memory. Or you have very low standards. Either way, I'm okay. A friend of mine is a sports columnist for the San Jose Mercury News. His name's Mark Purdy. And I say, Mark, what is the secret of you speaking to groups? And he said, well, it's pretty easy. I try not to be so bad that they boo me, but I try not to be so good that they ever invite me back. And you made the mistake of 7 years later inviting me back. So thank you for having a short memory.
No mistake.
I wanted to do something a little different tonight, and I hope that's going to be okay with you. When I was asked to talk about sustainable cities, I wanted to add to that the need for sustainable leadership that goes along with that. And in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, when we talk about sustainable cities, we're really talking about tackling what we call the issues. The, T-H-E-E, transportation, housing, education, and the environment. There are other issues that are incredibly important, but when it comes to a sustainable region, we think those four are certainly key. And how I'd like to tie in leadership as well is something that I've been pondering for about 9 months now, and it is tracked with the presidential primary campaign. This will be the 10th presidential election that as a citizen I will have the pleasure of participating in. And I must tell you, while I always enjoy that, it is the most troubling of the 10 presidential primary elections in which I've participated as someone who's so proud to be an American citizen. And so I wanted to weave in just what's been going through my mind these last 9 months, especially during this debate season of the last several months, about leadership and lessons that I've tried to pick up along the way on leadership. So I'm going to weave those two themes in together. I'm not sure it will work, but if you'll be patient with me, we'll try to do it together. Does that sound okay? I'm going to grab a clicker. And as I put this together in final form yesterday, I did one other thing. As we talk about both sustainable cities with examples and sustainable leadership, I tried to think of 7 traits of successful and sustainable leadership. And as a special treat to you, I stayed up extra late last night to come up with 7 words that all started with a P, so that there would be alliteration to our conversation this evening. So those overall messages are going to be around both sustainable cities and sustainable leadership. First, to be purposeful. Second, to be persistent. Third, be peaceful. Fourth, be positive. Fifth, be passionate. Sixth, be patient. And seventh, be powerful. And those are all affirmative areas that we need to be, or that at least I think I need to be a sustainable leader. But I'm going to start with one not to be, and that is to be overly proud. And here is my example of that. I want to show you my car. That is my car. My car is a black Prius that has been vinyl wrapped as an advertisement for a friend of mine's startup business. And this is where you can't take yourself too seriously or be overly proud. I was on stage with this gentleman and the mayor of San Jose being the 10th largest city in our country. And I was interviewing those two, and he challenged me in front of 150 of his employees in his startup, which you figured out is called Nexenta. And he said, Carl, for my employees, I'll give them $1,000 if they will wrap their car for 6 months and be a driving billboard for the company. Will you do it in front of 150 employees and a radio audience of about 30,000? And I said, yes, I will, under 2 conditions. 1, make it 2,000. And 2, don't give it to me. But there's a scholarship program that is in the name of my wife and I. And if you will give that to a young lady on the east side who was just below the line of getting a scholarship this year, 5-person household, $24,000 a year, and just fell below the line in getting a scholarship from us this year. I said, if you'll give her that scholarship so that she can start her freshman year in college, I will wrap my car with your silly logo. He said, deal. And he's going to do another $4,000 in 3 more months for her second year in college as well. But the proud part is, I look pretty silly going down the street. I'm not sure what happened. Does someone know how to make that big again? You're good. I look pretty silly going down the street. And when I brought that home for the first night, I have a 6-year-old and an 11-year-old daughter, and the 6-year-old just has a heart of gold. But even she walked outside, and my wife and I are watching her from the window. And she walks out, and she sees the car, and all we see her do is this. So, how many parents in the room? Right, most of us, right? So, this is a teachable moment. I sit down my 6-year-old with the heart of gold, and my 11-year-old with the heart of steel. And they said, Daddy, we love you, but we're never driving in my car. I said, let me explain what it is. And I told them the story. And I said, what do you think? And the 6-year-old was immediately won over. She gave me a big hug and said, Daddy, yes, I'll drive in that car. And the other one said, no, not a chance. It was really nice what you did, but I'll never drive in that car. So here was our deal. In 3 months, when we picked the new round of scholars for these scholarships, I said, come with me, and you get to pick who we select for the scholarship, if we can do that for another 6 months. And she said, okay, good. If I'm part of the decision, then we'll do it again. So, teachable moment for parents, and a reminder to me as someone who's trying to be a better leader, not to be proud. So let's jump right in and tie this to sustainability. The first lesson on leadership and sustainability for me is to be purposeful. Jimmy Carter, I think, is the best former president our nation has ever known, certainly in my lifetime. And what he has done and what he continues to do with his wife is truly amazing. We had a chance to co-host him in Silicon Valley to build some homes a few years ago. And we talked about this quote: if your dreams don't scare you, they're not big enough. And as we were pounding nails, it reminded me of something that we tried to do on the sustainability issue around affordable homes, which is one of the most intractable challenges, certainly in our 9-county Bay Area. Well, 15 years ago, we had an idea. We had heard about housing trusts, and housing trusts across the United States are at the local, regional, and even state level. And 15 years ago, we thought we're going to follow the pack and form a housing trust. And all these trusts were funded through taxes and fees. And we weren't against reaching into our own wallets, so we surveyed. Hey, Silicon Valley, will you pay a tax or a fee to establish a housing trust so that we can help more folks secure affordable homes? And it was a fascinating survey, because overwhelmingly people said, yes, housing is a crisis, and this was 15 years ago in Silicon Valley. That was overwhelming. And yes, a housing trust sounds like a pretty creative and innovative way to help address that crisis. And absolutely no that we'll pay a tax or a fee to fund it. We had 21% support. And I've run a lot of campaigns. I've never won with 21% support. But instead of giving up on it, that old expression, when the door's locked, check the windows. So somebody came up and said, after we saw those survey results, we don't have to do it like, at that time, 275 other regions did it with a tax or a fee. This is Silicon Valley. Let's do it through voluntary contributions. And we weren't that smart. So we said, sure, we'll try that. And to test ourselves, we gave ourselves 24 months to raise $20 million to see if we could create a housing trust on voluntary contributions. And there were some cynics amongst us. If you're familiar with Silicon Valley, somebody came up to me and said, 20 million, that sounds like 2 homes in Los Altos Hills. And today it's about 1 home in Los Altos Hills. But we said, you're missing the point. 20 million with the leveraging model that we want to create is about 200 million in private development. And with that amount of money, we believe we can help about 4,800 families, equally divided, a third, a third, a third. A third for people who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless, a third for affordable rental homes, and a third for people who wanted to buy that first home but couldn't cobble together that down payment and closing cost assistance. And to light a fire under ourselves, we said, we're going to do this in 24 months. Well, 24 months later, we stood in front of a group of folks because for the last 14 months, the economy had turned after the dot-com bust. But we were accountable to that pledge. And we didn't meet the goal of 20 million. We exceeded it. We raised 20.6 million. 2 out of every $3 from private citizens, private employers, and private foundations. 1 out of every 3 from our local governments, as long as it wasn't a new tax or fee, just belt-tightening and prioritizing. And we rolled that out. Well, on April 1, we're going to be celebrating the 16th year of that housing trust. Remember the goal, 20 million leverages, 200 million helps 4,800 families. To date, we've raised $79 million. We've leveraged $1.9 billion in private development. And we helped our 15,000 family last April. All because we decided we could be purposeful with dreams that scared us, but that were worthwhile. And without homes that are affordable for everyone in our community, we can't have a sustainable community. The second lesson is to be persistent. Does anyone recognize this picture? Got some technology folks in the room?
Founders of Fairchild.
That's right. It's the founders of Fairchild. Let me tell you a little bit more about them. One of them was on my board for 12 years. What a job. Gordon Moore.
Gordon, yeah.
And you see Gordon Moore with a nice crew. And his co-founder of a small little company called Intel, named Bob Noyce. But this picture was from 1957, when 8 young PhD graduates stood up to the brilliant but belligerent management style of someone named William Shockley, who had formed Shockley Semiconductor in Mountain View. A month after they confronted him, they started their own company called Fairchild Semiconductor. And from Fairchild was birthed Intel, Kleiner Perkins, and scores of Silicon Valley spin-offs in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. To the world, they're known as the Fair Children. To William Shockley, until the day he died, he would call them the traitorous eight. But the lesson around sustainability, both of our cities and as leaders, is to be persistent. The quote is from Nike: "Success isn't given, it's earned." 6.5 years ago, I sat with U.S. Senator Dianne Feinstein on stage. We were celebrating a full funding grant agreement for our BART extension into Silicon Valley of $900 million, and we were doing an interview on stage in front of 500 Silicon Valley leaders. And she had warned me in advance to make it fun, but she challenged me on stage in front of those leaders to step forward on her desire to protect the Bay and our mutual concern with sea level rise, let alone that cataclysmic event of a storm or an earthquake, that so much around our beloved Bay could be threatened. Matter of fact, it's $10.5 billion worth of assets, like the water pollution control plant, utility lines, PG&E is here. All that investment, let alone iconic global brands, that all built anywhere from 1 to 20 feet below sea level around this beautiful bay. And she challenged me on stage, could we do something to fix that together? 6.5 years later, be persistent. We have finally found what we think is the right climate to go to our voters in about 89 more days for the June 7th election for the first time ever a 9-county ballot measure to raise $500 million for bay restoration and flood protection. We have to, as public and private sector leaders, take protecting and enhancing our environment much more seriously if we're going to have sustainable cities, sustainable region, and a sustainable state. And it means putting your wallets where your words are. We as a business community are raising $6 million to run a campaign to tax ourselves and our employees for these benefits, because it's critical to sustainability. The third lesson on sustainability and leadership is to be peaceful. And I love this quote: breathe. It's just a bad day. It's not a bad life. As Jake mentioned, I would prefer to be on 2 wheels rather than 4, and in spring, summer, and fall, most of my days I commute 17 miles each way each day to work. Keeps me in shape and allows me to eat as much chocolate as I want. Well, not too long ago, I was on that ride to work, and I managed somehow in the first 4 miles to get 3 flat tires. But I only had 2 tubes and hatch kits. So that third one was a bit of a doozy. And I thought I had ruined my day, and then I had to ruin my wife's day to come and rescue me. But perspective is important, and having that peace in adversity is as well. So I'm using a personal example. You probably don't recognize this person. His name is Mark Heremans. He's a Belgian. When he was 27 years old in 2001, he was competing in the World Championships of Ironman distance triathlon on the Big Island of Kona, Hawaii. And in his first race at that distance on the Big Island for the World Championships, at just 27, he placed a very impressive 6th place. And big things were predicted for Mark Heremans. Very humble man, great young man. And then January 28th of 2002 rolled around. While on a routine training ride on the island of Lanzarote, he hit a rock in the road, flipped off his bike down a mountainside, and he landed on the rocks below. 2 inches to one side, he would have been fine, bruised and battered, but fine. 2 inches to the other, he would have died instantly. Where he landed, as fate would have it, he's paralyzed for the rest of his life. But he decided that he could have a peace about that, and a determination with that peace. And he still wanted to be the Hawaii Ironman world champion. 5 years later, he was back, with no feeling for the rest of his life from his chest down. He swam 2.4 miles in the Kailua Kona Harbor. No legs. No muscles below his chest. Got into that handcart, and in the heat and humidity of Hawaii, rode 112 miles, and then switched over to another handcart for the 26.2-mile marathon. 140.6 miles, 100 degrees, 100% humidity, and crossed the finish line as the first disabled world champion of the Hawaii Ironman. He has a peace to this day about what fate has brought his way. And as leaders trying to create sustainable cities, I think it underscores the balance we need in our own lives. The fourth is to be positive. I love this quote. The only people with whom you should get even are those who have helped you. Don't carry grudges. President Lincoln had a Secretary of War. Does anyone remember his name? I can't be the only poli-sci major here. Yes, Edwin Stanton. Edwin Stanton was brilliant and a bit of a temper. In 1885, before President Lincoln was President Lincoln, Edwin Stanton had a very successful law practice and had an opportunity to work with Abraham Lincoln. And instead of doing so, he publicly and privately humiliated Abraham Lincoln. To a group he said, and I don't usually swear, but I'm quoting, "Why did you bring that damn long-armed ape here? He doesn't know anything and he can do us no good." Instead of carrying that bitterness, he decided to be better, not bitter, and he picked Edwin Stanton as his Secretary of War 6 years later when he became President of the United States. And they became lifelong friends and allies. The sustainable part is around transportation. As Jake mentioned, we work a little bit on that at the leadership group. And over the past 3 decades, we've had the pleasure of running 5 successful transportation sales tax campaigns that collectively have raised or are raising $12 billion in local funds. And right now, for the past 3.5 years, we're putting together a 2016 November ballot measure for another $6 billion in locally generated transit funds. The last one we ran, fortunately successfully, was in 2008. And this is about being positive. We lost on election day, needing a 2/3 vote. On election night, we didn't have 66.67%. We had 66.54%. And this was a gut check, because what happened in 2008 in September of that year? The worldwide economy collapsed. And we never polled after that September date above 62%. I pulled my team together and said, it's your choice. We've been working 100-hour weeks for 3 months. It means 100-hour weeks for another 6 weeks. We're polling at 61%. And we couldn't raise the money we needed to run the campaign. A $2.5 million budget became a $1 million budget. And the life was sucked out of the effort. And to a person, each with a choice, they said, we're doing this. And we ran the most creative, cost-effective campaign we've ever had the pleasure of running together. 800,000, forgive me, 750,000 votes cast. And we were 66.54%. Well, then they started counting the absentees, and that took 2 weeks, and we got to 66.63. And then they started counting the provisionals, and that's when we had a flicker of hope, because in our creativity we had run the smartest college campus campaign that we've ever run. And that's where the provisional voters were. Students who wanted to vote but didn't know where to vote. A full month after, I'm getting off a plane in Ireland at 2 in the morning to give a speech there. The guy with me's cell phone rings, because I'm too cheap to have international dial. He hands me the phone because it's my wife telling me that we had just won, with the final count being 66.78%. Out of 750,000 votes cast, we won by 2,250 votes. The closest campaign we've ever won by 0.11%. And the lesson of sustainability, you heard the numbers earlier about transportation needs, is also the lesson on leadership. Stay positive and get the job done. The fifth is about community, which we can't forget as leaders, right? And the lesson is to be passionate. Proud people count their riches. Humble people count their blessings. Anyone from Sacramento here besides your leader? 3, 4. Do you do the Run to Feed the Hungry?
Every year.
Every year. It's been running for how many years now?
22.
22. Well, you're our role model, because on Thanksgiving morning 2004, we woke up and we flipped on KCBS radio. There was, that was loud. If you want to walk out, I get it, but please. Or I'm going to need therapy. We flipped on KCBS radio, and the announcer was talking about 20,000 people downtown running and walking to help feed the hungry. But he wasn't talking about wealthy Silicon Valley, which is twice your size and twice the wealth of Sacramento. He was talking about Sacramento and this run to feed the hungry. And I turned to my wife and said, somebody ought to do that here. And she turned to me with that Leslie look and said, well, maybe that's us. You know, we've been doing triathlons and marathons for our whole relationship, and we never give back. And there are two kinds of people, right? As leaders, we know this. There are talkers and takers, and there are doers and donors. And we've been talkers and takers for a decade and racing around the world. So we figure we don't know what we're doing, which is probably all we need to know. And we put together something to emulate what you've done in Sacramento. And that year later, we show up to check registration 10 days before the race. We had 250 volunteers signed up. We had 100 people signed up for our race. And the title sponsor wanting to know why they were giving us all this money to help needy charities in our valley. Well, fortunately, that last 10 days it picked up a little bit. And then race morning, 1,200 people who hadn't registered showed up on race morning to go with the 700 who had registered. We had to delay the race by a half an hour, trying to sign people up as quickly as we could. In that first year, we were able to give away $88,000 to our food bank, in our housing trust, in our Healthier Kids Foundation. Well, fast forward 10 years later, for the last 4 years in a row, we've been the largest timed Thanksgiving weekend race in the world. And we're now giving away, on average, close to $1 million each year to 5 great local charities who help families in need throughout Silicon Valley. And it's just because as leaders, if you're going to have a sustainable region, you can't forget that not everyone is as blessed as those of us in this room. The fifth lesson, forgive me, the sixth lesson is to be patient. And this is one of my role models. He's the founder of a company that you've never heard of called Synopsys. It's the largest EDA company in the world, electronic design manufacturing. And he has a saying, his name is Artegius, that he tries to leave every meeting, no matter how difficult, with the goal of making the other person feeling an inch taller. Imagine if that's how we ran all of our meetings as public and private sector leaders. But his goal is never to make himself taller by making someone else feel smaller. And it's an amazing goal for him to have. And it brings to mind our goal of being patient with people. Because it's easy to get upset with that constituent meeting or that community conversation and not keeping our cool. I just love showing this. This is Artegius when he founded his company 23 years before. I've often wondered what was in that hand, but I've never had the courage to ask him. The seventh lesson on sustainable cities and sustainable leadership is to be powerful. I talked about my daughters earlier. This is them. Jessica is 11. Sienna is 6. And the quote is to let your faith be bigger than your fears. I hope you don't mind if I get personal. Jessica was born to us the old-fashioned way, two people married who really liked each other and had a child. Sienna came about when plans don't go your way. In 2008, February 7th, we lost a child at 20 weeks. And then we lost another one in utero in September of that year. And Leslie's doctor said, don't try that again. You're going to be having the same result. So, that earlier comment, doors locked, check, window. We decided to adopt. And I'll never forget, I was giving a speech on May 15, 2009. I stepped off the stage and my chest was vibrating. And it kind of scared me. And then I realized it was my phone. And my wife was calling saying, an attorney just called from Ogden, Utah. And if we can get on a plane tomorrow, the baby born at 4 o'clock today might be ours. So we dropped everything. I emailed my board, she did the same with hers. Jumped on the plane, walked into a hospital room in Ogden, Utah. The birth mom saw us, starts crying. My wife starts crying, our little girl starts crying. There's not a dry eye in the house. And she entrusted us with her 5 pounds, 6 ounce, 1 day old baby girl. That mom in that hospital bed was 17 years old. Sherry had a 2-year-old at home. She lived with her little sister, who also had a 1-year-old. And their mom, and their aunt, in a 1-bedroom Section 8 home in Ogden, Utah. And she loved that child enough to entrust her with us, thinking there may be a better life ahead for that little girl. That's trust. The lesson here is to be powerful and let our faith be bigger than our fears. We were very afraid to adopt a child. I wondered, can I love a baby as much as one that was born to us in the traditional way? The answer is yes, by the way, or even more feeling of responsibility. But our little girl is 100% Latina. And as we looked into the birth mom story, and the story of Latinas in Ogden, Utah, it emulated the story of Latinas in wealthy Silicon Valley. Less than half graduate from high school. Barely double digits will ever set foot on a college campus. Single digits will ever graduate from college. And 3% will ever work in a tech company in Silicon Valley. And only 1% in a STEM field in that tech company. And we want to change that. Remember, one of the areas of sustainability, along with housing that we talked about, and transportation that we talked about, and the environment that we talked about, is education. And if you're going to have a diverse valley, you need to be able to hire from that diverse valley. So last year we partnered with a friend who runs our local Hispanic Foundation for the Latino College Scholarship Initiative. Our goal isn't that ambitious. We want to provide 100 Latinos graduated from Silicon Valley high schools full ride scholarships if they're declared STEM majors going into their junior year of college. 100 a year for the next 5 years, 500 students. But 50 have to be Latinos. 50 Latinos. We're accepting the applications. The deadline is next week for the first group of 100. We funded 75 so far. But we don't want the fate to befall kids in our community, because your destiny should not be determined by where you were born. It should be determined by where you are hoping to go. And that can be a powerful change in building a sustainable city if we don't give up on whole demographics of people. So I hope I didn't stray too far off course. But when Jake invited me, I felt challenged to do something more than just a few minutes about sustainability. It's sustainability as cities, but also as the leaders who drive those cities. To be purposeful, persistent, peaceful, positive, passionate, patient, and powerful. Thanks for letting me join you for a few minutes tonight.